Sometimes the stories that hurt the most are the ones we never imagined we'd have to tell. I'm going to share with you today about a chapter in my life that still makes my hands tremble when I think about it. Not from fear anymore, but from the memory of how lost I once was in my own home. It's about the winter I discovered that love, when it dies, can turn a sanctuary into a prison. My name is Margaret Thompson, and I'm 77 years old now. I spent 35 years teaching second grade at Riverside Elementary School, watching children learn to read their first sentences and solve their first arithmetic problems. I retired in 2010, proud of the hundreds of young minds I'd helped shape. I thought I knew about patience, about kindness, about the quiet dignity of service, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I would endure in my own home during the final years of my marriage. I met Robert Thompson in 1964 at a church social in our small Connecticut town. He was tall and confident, worked as an accountant at a local firm, and had a smile that made me feel like I was the only woman in the room. We married in 1966, right after I finished my teaching degree. Our wedding was simple: my mother's homemade cake, borrowed flowers from the church garden, and a dress I'd sewn myself from ivory satin. We couldn't afford much, but we were happy, or at least I thought we were. We built what I believed was a good life together. We had our daughter Sarah in 1970, bought our first house in 1973, a modest colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch that I fell in love with the moment I saw it. I planted roses along the fence, red and pink ones that bloomed every June. Robert worked long hours, climbing the corporate ladder steadily. I taught my students by day and came home to cook dinner, help Sarah with homework, maintain our home. It was traditional, yes, but it was ours. The years passed in that peculiar way they do in long marriages, sometimes slowly, sometimes in a blur. Sarah grew up, went to college, got married, gave us two beautiful grandchildren. Robert and I settled into a comfortable routine. We weren't passionate anymore, hadn't been for years, but we were companions. We watched television together in the evenings, ate breakfast across from each other every morning, slept in the same bed every night. I thought that was enough. I thought that was what marriage became after 50 years. I should have seen the signs. In 2017, Robert started working later and later. He'd come home smelling of perfume that wasn't mine, something floral and young. He bought new clothes, expensive ones, and started going to the gym. At 72, he suddenly cared about his appearance again. When I asked him about it, he said he just wanted to stay healthy. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. After 5 decades together, you trust the person sleeping beside you. You have to, or what was it all for? Then came that December night in 2018. I remember every detail with the kind of clarity that trauma burns into your memory. It had been snowing since morning, and I'd spent the afternoon baking Christmas cookies, the same recipes I'd used for 50 years. Gingerbread men, sugar cookies cut into stars and trees, Russian tea cakes dusted with powdered sugar. The house smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. I was pulling a batch from the oven when I heard Robert's car in the driveway. But there were 2 car doors closing, 2 sets of footsteps on the porch. I walked to the front hallway, still wearing my apron covered in flower handprints. And there she was, young, impossibly young, with smooth skin and long dark hair, and the kind of figure that makes men forget they're married. She was wearing a camel-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than my entire winter wardrobe. Robert was helping her out of it, his hand lingering on her shoulder in a way that made my stomach drop. "Margaret," he said, not even looking at me, This is Emily. She'll be joining us for dinner tonight. Please prepare something nice. Not do you mind? Not is that okay? Just a command issued to me in my own home like I was hired help. Emily smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Thompson. Robert has told me so much about you. Her voice was sweet, practiced, the kind of sweetness that covers poison. I stood there with my oven mitts still on, a woman of 74 in my own entryway, and I couldn't find my voice. What do you say when your husband brings his mistress home? What words exist for that kind of violation? Hello? I finally managed. I'll get dinner started. I walked back to the kitchen on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Behind me, I heard them settling into the living room, Robert offering her wine, her laughing at something he said. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter and tried to breathe. I should have thrown them both out. I should have screamed, broken dishes, called my daughter, packed a bag and left, but I didn't. Instead, I did what I'd been doing for 52 years. I cooked. I roasted a chicken with herbs from my garden, made creamy mashed potatoes, prepared a winter vegetable medley. I set the dining room table with our good china, the set we'd gotten as a wedding gift. And while I worked, I cried. Silent tears that fell into the mixing bowl, into the sink, onto the cutting board where I was chopping carrots. Dinner was torture. Emily sat in the chair where Sarah used to sit, complimenting the food with the magnanimity of a queen praising a servant. Robert carved the chicken, something he hadn't done in years, serving Emily the best pieces. He looked at her the way he used to look at me in 1964, and I realized I'd become invisible in my own marriage. "This is delicious, Margaret," Emily said, dabbing her perfect lips with my grandmother's linen napkin. "You're such a wonderful cook. Robert is lucky to have someone to take care of him like this." The words were kind, but the meaning underneath was clear. I was the cook, the maid, the caretaker. She was the woman he desired. After dinner, I cleared the plates while they retired to the living room. Through the doorway, I could see them sitting close together on the sofa, Robert's arms stretched along the back of the cushions behind her. I washed dishes by hand, even though we had a perfectly good dishwasher, because I needed something to do with my shaking hands. Emily left around 10, with Robert walking her out to her car, standing in the snowy driveway, talking to her for 15 minutes while I watched from the bedroom window upstairs. When he finally came to bed, I pretended to be asleep. I couldn't bear to look at him. I prayed that night was an anomaly, a terrible mistake that would never happen again. But 3 days later, she was back, and then again and again. By January, Emily was coming to our house 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes Robert would call from work. "Emily and I are stopping by for lunch. Have something ready." I'd stand in my kitchen, surrounded by groceries I'd rushed to buy, preparing meals for my husband's mistress. In February, the situation escalated. Robert informed me that Emily would be staying in our guest room occasionally when she worked late on projects with him. The guest room I decorated so carefully for when Sarah and the grandchildren visited. I stripped the bed of Sarah's favorite quilts and replaced them with plain linens, trying to remove any trace of family warmth from that space. The first morning Emily had breakfast in our kitchen, sitting at the table in a silk robe, was the morning something inside me broke. She asked for eggs Benedict, something I'd never made in my life. Robert looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to perform this culinary trick. I had to look up a recipe on my old iPad, the one Sarah had given me, while they sat together reading the newspaper like a couple. The hollandaise sauce broke twice before I got it right. When I finally served it, Emily took one bite and said, "Oh, this is a bit lemony for my taste, but it's sweet that you tried." Robert didn't defend me. He just asked if I could make regular scrambled eggs instead. I took her plate back to the kitchen, scraped my failed attempt into the garbage, and made scrambled eggs with my jaw clenched so tight I gave myself a headache. This became my life. I, who had shaped young minds for 35 years, who had run a household and raised a daughter and been a respected member of our community, became a servant in my own home. Emily would leave her clothes for me to wash. She'd ask me to run errands for her, picking up her dry cleaning, buying specific foods she wanted. Once she asked me to drive her to a hair appointment because Robert was busy and she didn't want to take a taxi. I did it all. God help me, I did it all. Why? My daughter asked me that every time she called. "Mom, why are you still there? Why are you letting them do this to you?" I didn't have a good answer. I was ashamed, deeply, profoundly ashamed. But I also couldn't imagine leaving. That house held 50 years of my life. Every room contained memories. Sarah's first steps in the hallway, Christmas mornings around the tree in the living room, quiet Sunday afternoons in the garden. I'd scrubbed those floors, painted those walls, chosen every piece of furniture. It was mine in a way it could never be Emily's, no matter how many nights she spent there. And beneath the shame was something else, a stubborn, foolish hope that this was temporary, that Robert would wake up one morning and realize what he was doing, that the man I'd married was still somewhere inside this stranger who'd invaded our home, bringing his mistress like some medieval lord exercising his rights. I told myself it was a phase, a midlife crisis come late. Men Robert's age, they sometimes panicked about mortality, about aging. Emily was young and beautiful and made him feel vital again. It would pass. It had to pass. But it got worse. By March, Emily was commenting on how I kept the house. "You know, Margaret, if you organized the pantry differently, it would be much more efficient. These curtains are rather dated, don't you think? Robert mentioned you used to be quite stylish. What happened?" Each comment was a paper cut, small but painful, and they accumulated until I felt like I was bleeding from 1,000 tiny wounds. The breaking point should have been the incident with the steak. It was a Saturday evening in April, and I'd prepared filet mignon, spending more money than I'd spent on meat in months, because Robert had specifically requested it for Emily. I cooked it medium rare, the way Robert had always liked it. Emily cut into hers, looked at the pink center, and pushed her plate away. "I can't eat this. It's practically raw." Robert immediately turned to me. "Margaret, how could you not know Emily likes her meat well done? You should have asked." Something in his tone, the automatic assumption that I was at fault, the complete lack of consideration, made my hand shake. The fork I was holding clattered against my plate. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'll make you another one." "Never mind," Emily said with exaggerated patience. "I'll just eat the sides." "It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Robert spent the rest of the meal apologizing to her, telling her about restaurants he'd take her to, places we'd never gone together in 52 years of marriage. That night, after Emily left and Robert fell asleep, I went down to the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept my teaching certificates, awards I'd won, photographs of my students. I looked at the face in those old pictures, a young woman with bright eyes and confidence, someone who'd believed she could make a difference in the world. I didn't recognize her anymore. I should have left then. I know that now. But I stayed. Through the spring and into summer, I endured. I became a ghost in my own life. moving through rooms like I was transparent. Emily's presence expanded while mine contracted. She rearranged furniture. She bought new towels and replaced mine. She suggested to Robert that the wallpaper in the bathroom was outdated. Wallpaper I'd chosen and hung myself in 1985. My daughter Sarah came to visit in July and found me in the garden, deadheading roses at 7 in the morning, because I'd heard Emily say she didn't like getting up to the smell of coffee brewing. "Mom!" Sarah's voice was thick with tears. "Mom, what are you doing to yourself?" I couldn't answer her. I just kept cutting dead blooms, my hands working automatically while my mind was somewhere far away. "Come stay with me," Sarah pleaded. "Please, leave him. This isn't love. This isn't even respect. You're killing yourself for a man who doesn't deserve you." "This is my home," I said quietly. "I built this life. I won't let her take it from me." "She already has, Mom." "Can't you see that?" But I couldn't see it. Or I wouldn't. I was trapped in a kind of paralysis that I now understand as a form of trauma. Every day, I told myself I would do something. Pack a bag, call a lawyer, tell Robert to choose between us. And every day, I found a reason to wait just one more day. Until one more day became another month, another season. September came, and with it, a terrible irony. Emily started planning a surprise birthday party for Robert in our house. His 73rd birthday was in October, and she wanted to celebrate it with his colleagues, people I'd known for decades. She drew up a guest list, planned a menu, and informed me that I would be doing the cooking. "It's going to be elegant," she told me, sitting at my kitchen table with a notebook. "I'm thinking French cuisine. Can you handle that?" I looked at this woman, 39 years younger than me, planning a party in my home for my husband, and I heard myself say, "Of course." I spent 2 weeks preparing. I practiced recipes, bought ingredients, planned every detail. The night before the party, I baked and prepped until 2 in the morning. I told myself I was doing it for Robert, but really, I was doing it because I'd forgotten how to say no. I'd forgotten that I had the right to say no. The party itself was beautiful. The house looked lovely. The food was perfect, and Emily played hostess with practiced charm. She introduced herself to guests as Robert's close friend, and I watched people's eyes flicker between her and me, understanding dawning, embarrassment making them look away. I served hors d'oeuvres and refilled drinks, and nobody looked directly at me. I'd become the help at my own husband's birthday party. Late in the evening, I overheard Robert's colleague Frank talking to his wife in the hallway. "Jesus, I can't believe he brought her here. And poor Margaret cooking for them. It's degrading." His wife's response, "She allows it. At some point, you have to stand up for yourself." Those words followed me as I cleaned up after everyone left, as I washed dish after dish, while Robert and Emily sat on the back porch sharing a bottle of wine from his birth year that I'd been saving for a special anniversary. She was right, Frank's wife. I was allowing it, but knowing that didn't give me the strength to stop. October faded into November. Thanksgiving was approaching, and Emily announced she'd be spending it with us. Sarah called and said she couldn't bear to come home if that woman was going to be there. So for the first time in 48 years, I spent Thanksgiving without my daughter and grandchildren. Instead, I cooked a feast for 3, me, my husband, and his mistress, and listened to them talk about their plans to vacation in Florida after Christmas. I don't remember eating anything that day. I just remember the weight of the silence when they finally stopped talking, the sound of forks against plates, and the way Emily yawned and said, "I'm exhausted. Margaret, would you mind terribly cleaning up? Robert and I want to watch a movie. I minded. God, I minded. But I said, of course. And I cleaned up while they curled up together on my sofa and watched a romantic comedy. That night, I sat in the dark in my bedroom, the bedroom I still shared with Robert, though we hadn't touched each other in over a year, and I thought about my mother. She died in 1995, 23 years earlier, but I could still hear her voice. A woman must have dignity, Margaret. Without that, she has nothing. I'd lost my dignity. Somewhere between that first dinner and this Thanksgiving, I'd lost the very thing my mother had valued most, and I didn't know how to get it back. Then came December, and with it, a moment I didn't see coming. It was a Tuesday evening, unseasonably cold. Emily was staying over again. She'd been staying 3 or 4 nights a week by then. I'd made pot roast for dinner, and we were eating in the dining room when Robert suddenly gasped and dropped his fork. His hand went to his chest and his face turned gray. "Robert?" Emily said, more annoyed than concerned. "What's wrong?" He couldn't answer. He tried to stand and collapsed back into his chair. I knew immediately what was happening. My own father had died of a heart attack when I was 30. I ran for the phone and called 911, then rushed back to Robert. He was struggling to breathe, his eyes wide with fear. I knelt beside him, holding his hand, talking to him quietly, telling him to stay calm, that help was coming. Emily stood frozen in the corner of the dining room, her face pale. Is he dying?" "Get my medical information folder from the desk in the study," I told her. "The ambulance will need it." She didn't move. She just stood there, staring at Robert like he was a stranger. "Now!" I snapped, and the force in my voice surprised us both. She ran to get it, and I stayed with Robert, feeling his pulse, monitoring his breathing the way I'd learned in a CPR class I'd taken when Sarah was born. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. As they loaded Robert onto the stretcher, one of them asked, "Are you his wife?" "Yes," I said. "I'm coming with you." I looked back at Emily, expecting her to follow, but she was already gathering her purse, her coat. I can't handle hospitals," she said. "Call me when you know something." She left before the ambulance did. She just walked out the door and drove away while the man she supposedly loved was being rushed to the emergency room. I rode in the ambulance holding Robert's hand. At the hospital, I sat in the waiting room while they worked on him. I called Sarah, and she immediately started driving from Boston. I called Robert's brother. I contacted his office. I did not call Emily, and when she called me hours later, I didn't answer. Robert survived. They did an emergency angioplasty, inserted 2 stents, and said he'd been very lucky. Another 30 minutes and he might have died. I stayed at the hospital that night, sleeping in a chair beside his bed. When he woke up around 3 in the morning, groggy from medication, he found me there. He looked at me for a long moment, and tears started running down his face. "Margaret," he whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, holding the hand of a man who'd betrayed me in ways I never thought possible, who'd humiliated me in my own home, who'd chosen a woman young enough to be his granddaughter over 5 decades of marriage. "Where's Emily?" he asked after a while. "She couldn't handle hospitals," I said flatly. "She left." Something changed in his expression. Maybe it was the morphine, or maybe it was facing his own mortality. But he looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. "But you stayed." "I'm your wife," I said. "Of course I stayed." Over the next few days, as Robert recovered, Emily called several times. I answered once and told her Robert was doing better but needed rest. She asked when she could visit. I said I'd let her know and hung up. I never called her back, and Robert never asked me to. When he came home a week later, weak and subdued, the house felt different, quieter. Emily's things were still in the guest room, her clothes in the closet, her toiletries in the bathroom. I packed them all up, put them in boxes, and left them by the front door. Robert saw them there, but didn't say anything. 2 days later, Emily called his cell phone. He answered it while I was in the kitchen making lunch. I could hear his side of the conversation. "No, I don't think that's a good idea. I need to focus on my health. I'm sorry. No, don't come over. Goodbye, Emily." When I brought him his soup, he was staring out the window at the garden, where my roses had gone dormant for winter. "I ended it," he said without looking at me. "I told her not to contact me again." I set the tray down carefully. "All right." "Margaret, I know I can't. What I did was unforgivable. I know that. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know who I became." I sat down across from him. He looked old suddenly, really old. The brush with death had stripped away whatever had been propping up his illusion of youth. He was a 73-year-old man who'd nearly died, saved by a wife he'd been systematically destroying. "Did you love her?" I asked. It was the first time I'd asked the question directly. He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "No, I don't think I did. I loved the idea of her. I loved feeling, I don't know, relevant again, desired. She made me feel like I wasn't old, like I wasn't invisible. But love? No. And me?" My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. "Did you love me?" He looked at me then, really looked at me. "I do love you. I know I have no right to say that after what I've done, but I do. I always have. I forgot. I forgot what that meant. I forgot what you meant." I wanted to believe him. Part of me desperately wanted to believe that the man I'd married in 1966 was still somewhere inside this stranger. But belief wasn't enough. Trust, once shattered, doesn't simply reassemble itself because someone says they're sorry. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I told him honestly. "I don't know if I can ever forget what the last year has been like." "I understand," he said. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." We sat in silence, two people who'd shared a life but had become strangers. Outside, snow was starting to fall again, covering the dead garden in white. Over the following months, Robert tried. He really did. He was attentive, apologetic, grateful for every small thing I did. He told me every day that he loved me, that he was sorry, that he wanted to make things right. He went to therapy. He joined a cardiac rehabilitation program. He did everything his doctors told him to do. But something in me had died during that year of humiliation. Some essential part of my ability to love him, to trust him, to be vulnerable with him, it was gone. I cared for him because that's who I was, because 52 years doesn't just evaporate. But the warmth, the intimacy, the deep connection we'd once had, that was buried under too much pain to resurrect. We existed together in a kind of polite cohabitation. We were kind to each other. We never spoke about Emily again. But we weren't really married anymore, not in any meaningful sense. We were two people living in the same house, bound by history and habit, but fundamentally alone. Sarah noticed. She came for Christmas in 2019, and after Robert went to bed early, she sat with me by the tree we'd decorated together. "Are you happy, Mom?" I thought about the question. Was I happy? I was no longer actively miserable. The daily humiliation had ended, But happiness felt like something that belonged to a younger version of myself, someone I couldn't access anymore. I'm okay, I said. That's enough. Is it, though? You're 75 years old. How much time do you have left to just be okay? I didn't have an answer for her. Robert died in March of 2022, 3 years after his heart attack. It was another heart attack, this one massive and quick. He was in the garden I'd planted and he'd largely ignored for decades, and he collapsed among the rose bushes that were just starting to bud. I found him there when I came out to call him for lunch. He looked peaceful, really, like he'd just laid down for a nap in the spring sunshine. At the funeral, people told me what a wonderful marriage we'd had, how devoted we'd been to each other for 56 years. I smiled and thanked them and didn't correct them. What would be the point? The truth was complicated, painful, and private. Let them keep their illusions. Emily didn't come to the funeral. I don't know if she even knew he'd died. I never thought about her. After the funeral, after the estate was settled, after I'd done all the things a widow is supposed to do, Sarah sat me down. Mom, come live near me in Boston. Or if you want to stay here, stay, but don't stay in that house, please. It's full of ghosts. She was right. Every room reminded me not just of the good years, but of that terrible year. The kitchen where I'd cried while cooking for Emily, the dining room where I'd served them, the guest room where she'd slept. The house I'd loved had become haunted. So I sold it. I sold the house with the blue shutters and the wraparound porch and the rose garden. A young family bought it, a couple in their 30s with 2 small children. The wife told me excitedly about her plans for the garden, and I gave her all my gardening notebooks, decades of notes about what to plant when, how to care for the roses, when to prune. I moved into Meadowbrook Senior, living in October 2022. It's a nice place, clean, comfortable, with a small garden where I've started painting. I'd never painted before, but there's an art class here on Tuesday mornings, and I discovered I have a knack for watercolors. I paint flowers mostly, roses especially. My instructor says I have a good eye for color. I've made friends here. There's Dorothy, who was a nurse for 40 years and has a wicked sense of humor. There's Helen, who taught high school English and shares my love of books. There's George, a widower who lost his wife to cancer and understands grief in a way that doesn't require explanation. We play cards on Wednesday evenings and complain about the food, which is actually quite good, but complaining is one of the privileges of age. Sarah visits monthly, sometimes more often. My grandchildren, teenagers now, come less frequently, but when they do, we have real conversations. They tell me about their lives, their dreams, their troubles, and I listen the way I used to listen to my students, with full attention, without judgment. Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I think about those years with Robert, and I try to understand, how did we get there? How did a marriage that started with such hope and promise end with me as a servant in my own home? How did I lose myself so completely? I think about the small compromises that became bigger ones, the times I stayed quiet when I should have spoken up, the way I made myself smaller and smaller to make room for his ego, his needs, his wants. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow erosion, so gradual I didn't notice until there was almost nothing left of who I'd been. And I think about what I would tell my younger self if I could travel back in time. I'd tell her that love should never require you to diminish yourself. That partnership means 2 whole people choosing each other, not one person sacrificing everything for the other. That kindness and service are beautiful until they become self-destruction. I'd tell her to leave the very first time Robert brought Emily home. That dignity and self-respect matter more than any house, any history, any fear of being alone. That she was strong enough to start over, even at 74. But I couldn't tell her those things. I had to learn them myself in the hardest way possible. The thing is, I don't entirely regret my life. Those years of teaching were meaningful. Raising Sarah was a joy. Even the good years with Robert, before everything fell apart, gave me something valuable. I had love once, real love, even if it didn't last. I had a purpose. I made a difference in the world, even if it was just helping second graders learn to read. What I regret is the end. I regret staying as long as I did. I regret every meal I cooked for Emily, every insult I absorbed, every moment I allowed myself to be treated as less than human. I regret choosing my attachment to a house over my attachment to my own dignity. But regret is just another teacher, isn't it? And at 77, I'm still learning. Last week, a new resident moved into Meadowbrook. Her name is Patricia, and she's 82. I introduced myself, and we started talking. She told me she'd just left her husband of 60 years because he'd become verbally abusive. At 82, she'd packed a suitcase and left. "Weren't you scared?" I asked her. "Terrified," she said, "but I was more scared of dying while still being treated like that. I figured I had maybe 10 good years left. I wasn't going to spend them being someone's punching bag." I admired her courage, and then I realized she'd done what I'd failed to do. She'd chosen herself. We've become friends, Patricia and I. Yesterday we were sitting in the garden and she asked me about my marriage. I told her everything, the whole story, from that first terrible dinner to Robert's death. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Do you think you loved him?" she finally asked. At the end, I'd never let myself really consider that question. I think I loved who he'd been, who we'd been together, but the man who brought his mistress into our home and expected me to serve her? Number. I didn't love him. I'm not sure I even knew him. And now? Now I'm learning to love myself, I said. Better late than never. She smiled at that. Better late than never, indeed. You know what I've learned, sitting here in this garden, watching the autumn leaves fall, and thinking about the long, strange journey of my life? I've learned that we teach people how to treat us. For too many years, I taught Robert that I would accept anything, endure anything, because I was too afraid to lose him. And in teaching him that, I lost myself. I've learned that there's no virtue in martyrdom, despite what we were taught growing up. Suffering doesn't make you noble, it just makes you suffer. And choosing to suffer for someone who doesn't respect you isn't love. It's fear disguised as devotion. I've learned that it's never too late to choose yourself. Patricia did it at 82. I did it at 76 when I sold that house and moved here. Every day is a chance to start honoring your own worth. And I've learned that forgiveness is complicated. I forgave Robert before he died, in the sense that I stopped actively hating him. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the harm didn't happen. It doesn't mean the relationship can go back to what it was. Sometimes forgiveness just means releasing your grip on the anger, because holding on to it hurts you more than it hurts them. If I could speak to women who are in situations like I was, and I know they're out there, more of them than we want to admit, I would say this: your marriage is not worth more than your dignity. Your history with someone is not worth more than your present peace. The years you've invested are not worth more than the years you have left. Leave. If someone treats you as less than human, leave. If your partner brings another person into your home and expects you to serve them, leave. If you find yourself becoming invisible in your own life, leave. I know it's not simple. I know about the fear, the shame, the financial concerns, the weight of all those years together. I know about loving someone and hating them at the same time. I know about waking up in the middle of the night and wondering if you're crazy, if you're overreacting, if it's really as bad as it feels. It is. If it feels degrading, it is degrading. If it feels wrong, it is wrong. Trust yourself. And if you stay, like I stayed, don't waste years hoping it will magically get better. It won't. Not unless you demand change and enforce boundaries. And even then, some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals cut too deep. I'm 77 now, and I have maybe 10 or 15 good years left if I'm lucky. I'm spending them painting flowers, reading books, playing cards with friends, visiting with my daughter and grandchildren, and learning to take up space again. Learning to speak up. Learning to say no. Learning that my needs and wants matter just as much as anyone else's. It's a strange thing to be learning these lessons at my age. Most people figure this out in their 30s or 40s. But I was so invested in being a good wife, a good mother, a good woman, that I forgot to be a whole person. I forgot that goodness shouldn't require self-erasure. The roses I planted at that old house are still there. I drove by a few months ago and saw them blooming. The new owners have taken good care of them. They're thriving without me, which is exactly as it should be. I think I'm starting to thrive without that house, without Robert, without the weight of that terrible year. I'm lighter now, freer. And while I'll never get back the time I lost, I refuse to lose anymore. Sarah was right about the ghosts. That house was full of them. But I've learned that you don't have to stay haunted. You can walk away from the ghosts. You can choose the living world, even if that choice comes later than it should have. So here I sit in this October sunshine, telling you my story. Not because I'm proud of it. There's not much to be proud of in staying as long as I did, but because maybe someone needs to hear it. Maybe someone else is cooking dinner for her husband's mistress right now, wondering if this is really her life, wondering if she's strong enough to leave. You are. I promise you, you are. And if an elderly woman who spent 50 years being someone's wife before remembering to be herself can start over, so can you. It's never too late to choose dignity. It's never too late to choose yourself. That's what I've learned. That's what I wish I'd known sooner. That's what I hope you'll remember, long after you've forgotten the details of my story. Choose yourself. Always, eventually, choose yourself.